things well. I pray also that if I am speaking truth here, that it will register, and if it isn't, then it'll be with everything else, all the other noise we hear in this life. And I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. We have been talking about the destiny of Israel, and we have looked in Matthew chapters 20, I think it's 24, about the last times in terms of that kind of thing. We have looked at a little bit out of Revelation, but we've looked at chapters 36 and 37 of Ezekiel, which have actually already occurred in our world time frame. And we also looked at 38 and 39. And 38 and 39 of Ezekiel was the gathering of all the nations against Israel and coming together in what we would call Armageddon in the valley of Megiddo, etc., etc. And we've looked at that. Last week I began to talk to you about the Islamic State and also what they were doing in terms of bringing people together. And I talked about, and I've got to find the sheet where I did it, Revelation chapter 16. And I want to start with that tonight because I'm talking about a little bit about these three frog-like spirits that are actually in here, and I want to start with it. In Revelation 16, 12 to 16, it says this: the sixth angel poured his bowl on the great river Euphrates, which is where? Iraq. And its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. And I saw issuing from the mouth of the dragon, who is Satan, by the way, and from the mouth of the beast, which is basically that which stands against God and is the vehicle by which Satan works, from the beast, and from the mouth of the false prophet, three foul spirits like frogs, for they are demonic spirits performing signs, who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. Lo, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is he who is awake, keeping his garments, that he may not go naked and be seen exposed. And they assembled them at the place which is called in Hebrew Armageddon. Well, one of the things I've always wondered about is these foul spirits. I'm come to believe that maybe they are these Islamic radicals, and there are three different groups that we talked about. They are Hamas, Hezbollah, and Al-Qaeda, all three of which are radical Islam, but they are out there doing all kinds of things. For they perform signs, they go abroad to the kings of the world, and what are they doing? They're assembling them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. And then last week we began talking about ISIS. And what we talked about was their devotion to Islam, and really it's 7th century Islam. It's right after the time of the prophet. And I'm not sure he's not the false prophet. But because we've been talking about this stuff for hundreds of years, a couple thousand years, sooner or later somebody's going to be right about this, as the way I look at it. Anyway, we talked about their devotion to that, and this is ISIS, okay? ISIS is not Al-Qaeda. ISIS is not Hamas or Hezbollah. They're related like brothers or cousins. But Hezbollah and Hamas are really against the Jewish people more than other. That's their priority, it seems to me. They're against Israel. Hezbollah is in Lebanon, I believe, and Hamas is down in the Palestinians. They are financed by Iran, and this is common knowledge. Al-Qaeda is a different group. They are Sunni, by the way. Bin Laden was Sunni, and they come out of Saudi Arabia, but their aim is more on a global scale, effectively attacking the United States in terms of that. Now, the Islamic State, which we began talking about last week, the first thing is their devotion to the Islamic rule and the codes that come out of their religion, which really harken back to 7th century Muslim Islam, when it was started by the Prophet Muhammad. That is their driving force. The second thing we talked about last week is their territory. I gave you a couple of words. The caliphate is when you hear this word out there, this has to do with the kingdom of Islam, and it comes out of them, and they have to have territory to have a kingdom. One of the things that's going on right now in northern Syria and northern Iraq with ISIS is they are forming a kingdom, call it a caliphate. And that caliphate becomes the ground on which they have authority. And out of this guy named Baghdadi, I don't know if you still got his picture, but if you see this guy talked about, you need to keep him. He is the self-proclaimed caliph. And he's the 8th caliph, I think, is where he is. But he is sort of self-declared as the caliph over the caliphate which is forming in the ISIS state. Now, we talked about that. They have to have a territory. Otherwise, this person here, him, is not valid. He doesn't have any authority in which to deal with these things. Now, we talked about that. The territory is very important to them. That's different than Al-Qaeda. That's different than Hezbollah and Hamas and probably all the others too. They have to have territory, and they have proclaimed this now in terms of that. The ISIS state is that northern Iraq, northern Syria bunch, and that's where they are, okay? That's very important in terms of understanding what they are doing and the part that they play. Now, we have talked about the second coming. We have talked about the nation of Israel being reborn in terms of this in Ezekiel. And Christians have a play in this too in terms of that at that time. Jesus said, you got to guard yourself or you will be led astray by the deception, you might say, of the Antichrist. The deception has to do with, well, just what it says. You are deceived. And Jesus spoke about that at one place, and he says, don't be afraid of those who can kill the body. Be afraid of those who can take the soul. Now, I don't have the scripture on that, but he said that. So anyway, the ISIS group. Now, all Muslims. I am not sure, about when you talk about the Antichrist and you talk about that kind of stuff over hundreds of years. There's a lot of different calls in terms of who's the Antichrist and all that. For hundreds of years, it was the Roman Church. The Roman Catholic Church was, by Protestants, they got to be the Antichrist in terms of things. And they're one of the groups that was called that. Some people call Obama that. I don't buy it. I think he's a suit, but I don't have anything to do with that. But then there have been other groups that have talked about this. Sooner or later, somebody's going to be right, and I know that. What I want to talk about tonight is the Islamic State and the second coming and the end times and their understanding of it. We have our understanding, and we have talked a little bit about that. In this study, we're using the lens of Israel because they're going to be caught in that last struggle. Christians are going to be caught in that last struggle too. But what about Islamic State? How do these people think about the apocalypse, the second coming, and things like that? Well, I want to talk a little bit about them tonight so that we can kind of get an idea of where they're coming from and how this game gets played. All Muslims acknowledge that God is the only one who knows the future, but they also agree that he has offered us a peek at it in the Quran. and in the narrations of the Prophet Muhammad. The Islamic State differs from the rest of these jihadist kind of movement groups in believing that it is written into God's script as a central character, that the Islamic State is a central character, a player in the last times. Now that's distinctive from, say, Al-Qaeda and others. In broad terms, Al-Qaeda acts like an underground political movement. They have worldly goals in sight at all times. The expulsion of non-Muslims from the Arabian Peninsula, the abolishment of the State of Israel. This is part of Al-Qaeda's thinking. The end of support for dictatorships in Muslim lands. The Islamic State has its share of worldly concerns, including the places that it controls, like collecting garbage and stuff like that. But the end days, the apocalypse, is a chorus of its propaganda. I mean, it runs through the thinking of these people on a constant basis. Bin Laden, he rarely mentioned the apocalypse, and when he did, he always assumed that he would be long dead before that happened. Bin Laden is from the elite Sunni families out of Saudi Arabia, and they kind of look down on the speculation for the end times. But the Islamic State, their founding fathers, by contrast, saw signs of the end times everywhere. And they were anticipating within a year the arrival of the Mahdi. And I want to write this word down. Mahdi. The Mahdi is the Savior, you might say. He's a messianic figure, destined to lead the Muslims to victory before the end of the world. And these people in the Islamic State have a handle on this, whereas Al-Qaeda did not have a handle on this. Islamic State are longing in many ways for this epic good versus evil battle. And guess what? They're the good and we're the evil. Israel's evil. Whereas where we sit, we might just turn around, we're the good guys and they're the evil guys. Well, I learned something down in Kentucky when I was down there for 23 years. It's the difference of opinion that makes a horse race. Just watch the Kentucky Derby sometime. But they have visions of apocalyptic bloodbaths that fulfill their need for the end times. And that's what they do. This is not coming out of the mainstream Sunni sources, but it comes out of this group known as Islamic State. Let me give you a couple of the things that they believe. They believe that there will only be 12 legitimate caliphs, that's the leader, and Baghdadi is the 8th of that group. The armies of Rome will amass to meet the armies of Islam in northern Syria, and that Islam's final showdown with an anti-Messiah will occur in Jerusalem after a period of renewed Islamic conquest. So there's three things there. They believe that there's only 12 legitimate caliphs. Baghdadi is the 8th one. And that Islam's final showdown with Rome, now whoever Rome is in terms of that, but they consider that the West, will happen after renewed Islamic conquest, which the Islamic State are trying to do right now in terms of that. You got that map? You want to put that map up there that I have? If you look at this map of Syria, the Islamic State has attached great importance to the Syrian city of Dabiq, which is really it's a small place, but it's right up there by Aleppo. And that place is the place where these armies are going to come together in this apocalyptic kind of battle that they have and what they believe. The armies of Rome will set up their camp, and the armies of Islam will meet them, and it'll be right up in that area, because they don't show Dabiq on this, but that will be the West Waterloo, you might say, in terms of how they believe this stuff. And one Islamic State guy said, basically Dabiq is all farmland, and you can imagine large battles taking place there. And they actually are looking forward to this event in terms of how they see the world. And they think like this, that they are the catalyst for this. The spark has been lit here in Iraq. Its heat will continue to intensify until it burns the Crusader armies in Dabiq. Now, if you think about the three frog spirits, what was their main purpose? It was to gather the nations together for this. With that frog kind of sound that a frog spirit makes is to drag us into this battle. Now, I don't know about you, but it appears to me that this whole radical Islam is doing just that. It's firing up everybody around the world for some kind of confrontation that will happen. And it's working very solidly in all the nations of the world, as far as I can tell. Maybe not China right now. It does not seem to be there. But, even the beheading of the Japanese guys brings that nation alive in this thinking and this struggle. So anyway, the Islamic State waits an army there at Dabiq, which is right up by Aleppo, and that you might as well just call it that. And their defeat will initiate the countdown to the apocalypse. That's what they believe. Western media, I don't care which one you want to do, they really do miss the references to Dabiq in the Islamic State videos, and they focus on the lurid scenes of beheading and things like that, missing some of the underlying belief structure and system of stuff. Now, you have to understand, these beheadings or stuff are kind of like those frog spirits. Now, I realize if you got family over there that's being beheaded, it's a lot worse than that. But they cause a lot of noise. You might have 500 people killed in a battle. You might have a whole town slaughtered. But when they show these videos, they're doing it on purpose to drag us into the fight. And so that's what they're doing. And one of the guys that was killed over there, they thought he was an American, and they said, "We're burying the first American crusader." Now, you have to look at history and remember that the Crusades was all about who controlled the Holy Land. And it was Muslim against Christian. And all those crusades were back then were the same kinds of battles that we fight today, and that's what they do. Now, so you got to keep our history in mind here. Nothing happens in a vacuum. The prophetic understanding of this foretells that the big battle refers to the enemy as Rome. Now, who is Rome? Now, the Pope doesn't have an army, so it can't be that. So that's a matter of debate by everybody. But most of them think of it as, well, that's got to be the United States and the Western Europe and all that goes with them. But what it does mean is they're an infidel army. And the Americans will do very nicely for that. And that's what they think. After its battle in Dabiq, the Caliphate, which is really up there in that area in northern Syria over into Iraq, the Caliphate will expand. And it will begin, some believe it will then cover the entire earth, but I don't think that's going to happen. There's an anti-Messiah in their belief structure known in Muslim apocalyptic literature as Dajjal. Will come from the Khurasan region of eastern Iran and kill a vast number. Now, who from over in the area of Iran? What you also need to understand, and I don't know how all this plays out, but there are a lot of different players up in this thing, and they all have different agendas. We're kind of looking at the Islamic State and their belief structure and what they're doing, but Iran is a nation run by Muslims, and they heavily support Hezbollah and Hamas. So when they talk about that kind of thing, that there's going to be a group of people coming from the Iran region that will kill a vast number of the Caliphate's fighters until just about 5,000 remain. Well, the Muslim groups may fight one another into this because there's two groups, main groups out there. There's the Shia and the Sunni. Islamic State is a radical form that goes back to the 7th century of the Sunnis. So is Saudi Arabia. It's Sunni too, but they don't buy into the whole program. And I talked about that last week. The takfir are people who are excommunicated from the Muslim faith, and they all choose to do it to one another in terms of this. And so this Dajjal will come. And he prepares to finish them off. Then you realize that Islam has a very strong base in Judaism. That's one reason why this might be the Antichrist, because they have a strong base in the things that we believe as well. But this Dajjal, who is the anti-Messiah that comes from over there in that and will kill these caliphate fighters, they will be cornered in Jerusalem. And just as he prepares to finish them off, this is what Islamic State form of Sunnism believes, Jesus, the second most revered prophet in Islam, our Jesus, will return to earth and spear Dajjal and lead the Muslims to victory. This is what they believe. Now, if you start to bring that picture into our understanding of what Armageddon is and what we've been looking at in Ezekiel, you're beginning to get a feel for, well, maybe all this stuff is going to come to a head at one point. The prophet, that's Muhammad, said that one sign of the imminent arrival of the end days is that people will, for a long time, will stop talking about the end days. And if you go to the mosques, you'll find that most of the Muslim preachers are silent on the subject and have been. And so the Islamic State has its best and worst days ahead of it. If you think that they're the catalyst for the apocalypse and that they will be destroyed almost by a group that comes out of the Iranian area. Okay? So I guess the essence of what you need to take from Islamic State is that they are very much territorial, in that the caliphate is very important, but they are also very want to be the catalyst to bring about the end times. And what I also think is happening is you get what I see in this revelation is these frog-like spirits which are going to drag people into the fight, whether they want to or not. They kind of get pulled into it, are like us. But not just us. Western Europe, the French are being brought in because of what's going on over there, and other groups around. And all you have to do is move around all of Middle East, and this is all stirred up. And the apocalypse thought of the Islamic State is we're the catalyst, and we're the caliphate, which is a territory. Now, I don't know how many of you are, I'm an avid science fiction reader, and I have been since I was a junior high. But there was a book that was written back in 1965 called Dune. Anybody ever read it? If you've read it, you have a very good, solid picture of what I'm describing in terms of Islamic State. And if you haven't read it, it's a good book. But it's set on a planet that is all desert, very similar to the area there. But they talk about the freedom fighters, the Fadayin, or it's the Fadakin. I'm not sure which it is. One of them is the term that they used in Islam, and another is the term that is used in the book. These fighters are impassioned. They drive this all over the place. And that book really sounds like the drive, the impassion, what I see coming out, especially of the Islamic State, because they're kind of coalesced, but you probably see it in all these other groups as well. Now, the fight was the fourth thing I had up here. The ideological purity of the Islamic State has one compensating virtue. It allows us to predict some of that group's actions because they are so focused. Now, Osama bin Laden was seldom predictable. I mean, he had his version of this was a worldwide kind of thing, but it was not centered in a piece of land. One time he was asked by Peter Arnett, he says, "What are your future plans?" And bin Laden replied, "You'll see them and hear them in the media, God willing." By contrast, the Islamic State boasts openly about its plans. Not all of them, but enough so that you can, if you pay attention, you can learn a few things about these people. The Islamic State, the descriptions of how the Islamic State must conduct its foreign policy now that it is a caliphate. That's a piece of land, okay? It has already taken up the Islamic law. It refers to this. And this is an offensive jihad. Now, everybody know what jihad is? It's a holy war. That's what it is. Because they have become a caliphate, they have, the Islamic law refers to the offensive jihad. This is the forcible expansion into countries that are ruled by non-Muslims. Hitherto, before this, they were just defending themselves. Without a caliphate, there is no ability to do an offensive jihad. It's not a concept that can be really applied. But now that they have declared themselves a caliphate with a caliph, the wage of war is to expand the caliphate. And that's an essential duty of the caliph. So that guy that I put up there, Baghdadi, if he does not be impassioned to move this stuff out from there, they'll get rid of it. The laws of war under the Islamic State operate as policies that are, in terms of this thing, this is the way they think. The state has an obligation to terrorize its enemies, which is a holy order to scare the hell out of them with beheadings, crucifixions, and enslavement of women and children, because doing this hastens the victory and avoids a prolonged conflict. But what I see in the book of Revelation is it's something to draw us together for the fight, because it inflames our passions when you see that kind of stuff being done. Islamic law permits only temporary peace treaties lasting no longer than a decade, 10 years. And similarly, accepting any border is a curse, as stated by the prophet Muhammad. So they can't say, if they say, well, this is the final border for this place, no, that doesn't work very well at all with them. If the caliph consents to a longer-term peace treaty or a permanent border, he will be in error. Therefore, they will get rid of him. So Baghdadi, as long as he's moving forwards in terms of the Islamic law and war principles, he's okay. But the moment that he backs off that, somebody's going to come and take care of him. The caliph must wage jihad at least once a year. And that's a holy war. He may not rest, or he will fall into a state of sin. Therefore, he is looking at some kind of judgment. To send an ambassador to the UN is to recognize an authority other than God's. Therefore, they're not going to be involved with that. They will not deal with other governments because they are non-Muslim. Therefore, they're a different authority than God's, and that will not work for them. This form of diplomacy is shirk, or what they call shirk, or polytheism, and would be immediate cause to replace Baghdadi. There is no compromise in that. This is maybe a weakness as well as an asset in terms of how we deal with them. You can't even hasten the arrival of the caliphate by democracy either, by voting for political candidates. That is also heretical. Now, in thinking of this like this, and this is different than Al-Qaeda, this is different than Hamas and Hezbollah and all those, this bunch here, it's hard to really understand, but they are very hamstrung by their radicalism. They cannot deal with us that way. So if they enter into some kind of political understanding, it is ideological suicide for them. The Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas have succumbed in the governmental things of democracy and the potential for an invitation